This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
It's late, it's loud, it's live on Sunday with Toby Doncaster. And tonight I talk to Bob Craig, a well-known coach, about how to motivate students in the classroom. What has he got to say? Let's find out.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome everybody to my new show on Sunday night of all times. I'm really glad that you've joined me. I'm joined tonight by Bob Craig, who started off as a teacher, as we all do. And he was, hello Bob, how are you today?
Hi Toby, I'm good, thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk a little bit about who you are and why you're on the show. So you started off as a teacher. You taught A-level English as well as a course leader for communication studies, and you got involved in teacher training, coaching, and mentoring. You then moved to London and worked in Kensington and Chelsea College as an advanced practitioner, and you started the teacher training provision there. You then came and joined West London College and became head of professional development. And then you started your own consultancy, delivering CPD for teachers, coaching courses and consultancy projects on topics such as improving GCSE maths and English, which is my specialty, which is what I'm particularly interested in. So what I wanted to talk about today is how to bring about a motivational mindset with predominantly, what I teach, which is FE students. So they're 16 to 19-year-olds, and you've got the experience. You've walked the walk and talked the talk, so to speak. I'm just, I've tried the growth mindset, and I find, it's difficult to convince 16-year-olds that they've got the capability to do better in a subject like English, especially when they've been failing it at school. And to be honest, I'm a bit stuck. I don't know what else I could be doing. Engaging lessons, yep, I've ticked that. Bringing energy into the classroom, ticked that. Shared personal life stories, done that too. I've done so much, and it doesn't seem to work. I don't know. What do you think? What do you find works with 16 to 19-year-olds when it comes to motivating them to try to master something which they feel they don't have that potential going for them? What do you think?
Yeah, I can comment on that, Toby. I don't know if you're going to touch later, because as you were describing Carol Dweck's work about growth mindset,
Sure.
I got into that about 8 years ago. Started delivering sort of CPD at annual events, but I was more interested in some of the people who influenced Carol Dweck. I think she conceptualized it quite well and talked about the power of yet, for example, that if students can realize that they may, instead of labeling themselves as incompetent or I just haven't got a maths brain or I'm just not very good at writing fluent English, rather than seeing that as a sort of definitive label, actually she sort of focused on that idea of at the moment or yet, which I did quite like. But some of the people that influenced her, there's a guy called, I can't remember his first name now, someone Erickson, who talks a lot about deliberate practice.
Right.
And the other person, just to name check at this stage, and then I'll give you some examples in response to the question you asked. And then Matthew Said has written, he's still, you see him on television quite a lot. He often does paper reviews, and he wrote a book called Bounce: the power of practice, and the myth of talent and the power of practice.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was pretty much saying similar things to Carol Dweck about mindset, that okay, we're not all going to be great at everything, but the idea
No.
of labeling yourself as having a fixed mindset, not able to improve, never going to be able to make progress. Whereas Matthew Said in particular was talking very much about the power of practice, focused attention, small steps, marginal gains, and
Yes.
this
Yeah.
you know what I mean, that idea about of course we're all born with particular brains and DNA, and we inherit things from parents, but primarily Matthew Said talking about the idea about that sort of, how do we get better at anything? And it involves a lot of practice, it involves small steps, and it involves seeking help. And I think Carol Dweck picked up, on some of these ideas and popularized it, and credit to her for doing it. But I agree with you, a little bit skeptical about, um, I think there's maybe too much emphasis about, oh my goodness, this is such an amazing concept. She didn't invent the idea of
No.
motivational mindsets, but yeah, so that's some. I mean, the Guy Erickson talked about. He looked particularly at elite business people, elite sports people, and came up with this figure of 10,000 hours, which is clearly a lot more than
Yeah.
we get to support our GCSE English students. But there is some merit in the idea that things don't come straight away, and it does take dedication and persistence in order to, obviously, to get to elite level, but even to improve anything, it does take some time and overcoming those sort of wobbles along the way and things. So for me,
Uh,
I'll break down some of this, Toby, with students about. I sometimes teach them about, make it in approachable language, but I talk to students about mindset and resilience and say, and fear and anxiety. And so rather than just teaching them the subjects, I've always, even when I was a teacher, let alone now when I tend to do more sort of teaching teachers, but I
mm,
always sort of made a point of having conversations with students about the process of learning and what is motivation and what does learning look like, and if you make a mistake, what are your options. So I don't know
sure.
if you have these sorts of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And well, with English in particular, there are a lot of mistakes, and what I find with the students that I teach is that they it's interesting, isn't it? It's this continuum where you are unaware that you are unaware, and then
Yeah.
you are aware that you don't know, and then you know what you don't know, and then you become, what's it called, consciously competent.
Yeah.
You can do it without thinking about it, and it's almost what I get from a lot of 16-year-olds is oh, but it's so long, there's so much for me to learn. Now, either that, there's so much for me to learn, why should I bother? Or the other way around, they say, but I can already, communicate in English. I speak the language, I can read and write. Why do I need to do more?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when I say to them, okay, well, write me a letter. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's too long. That's too much effort. Okay, write me a paragraph. I've got no ideas. There's a lot of resistance, not resilience. I wish they had resilience. They've got a lot of resistance to it, and they don't want to. I suppose what you're
They do.
what I've just gathered from you, what they don't want to demonstrate is how they can't do what I've asked them to do. If you know what I mean, they don't want to appear foolish in front of their peers or in front of me,
Yeah.
even.
I do think there is something about that, being perceived by others and not sort of even asking questions because you might be perceived as a swot or something. But I do think, not you, Toby, because I know what an excellent teacher you are, but I do think sometimes having, you mentioned earlier, I've done consultancy work on GCSE Maths and English, and I think sometimes we need to pick our battles more. So if there's 10 things that students really need to know, then be clear in our minds what the two most important are, and really sort of come at that from different angles and make sure they do know when to put a full stop and not a comma, and they do know what a capital letter is, which sounds a bit rudimentary, but and if a student writes something and there's 2 or 3 errors, it's not a problem. But if it's like got 10 errors or more, then it becomes difficult. So I think there is something about us being clear what the primary focus is, which when I work with students, I always focused on writing what's the difference between a simple sentence and a complex sentence. And I'd really sort of embed that into them that, I like fish is a sentence. It's not a very interesting one. But I like fish, I go to the football on a Saturday is 2 different issues, whereas students would usually put a comma in there or nothing. So just really, as soon as they know what a sentence is and what a sort of difference between a comma and a proper noun and a few really fundamentals, then I would start going into more detail. So that's, I think, really that applies to any level in any subject. What is the sort of underlying foundations, that the core that pretty much everyone needs before you go on to the sort of the bits around the edge of the core?
What I found interesting, because I began to notice it this particular term, is that everything that I cover in a previous lesson, so like if I do a text on, Dracula, and there's some vocabulary to do with Dracula, a lot of students will use the, like words like macabre and eerie, and they will start using it in their writing without being prompted. I haven't said to them, "Oh, I'm expecting you to use these words." These are just new words that I've taught, and they're using them in their writing. And it's interesting, as I pointed out earlier. They go from, "Oh, I've got nothing to write," to, "I'm going to try to write, and I'm going to use the scaffolding that you've provided, the sentence structures that you've provided, to give it a go, but I don't really want to do it."
Yeah. And part of, one of the themes of this conversation is about motivation, and we've talked quite a lot, haven't we, in the past about coaching. And to me, we can say all day, English is really important. If you get your own business and you're writing invoices and you're trying to sort of, any sort of marketing that you do, if it's riddled with spelling errors, then people are going to make a judgment about that. We can say, when you have your own families, if you do, it's great to help your children. So we can say that all day to them, but it's just noise unless we actually ask them what they think the value of English is. Let them have a joke and let them offload a bit about having to write letters to your local council when they probably, maybe when they get older, they might have to do that. But actually start from the premise of, really coaching them and saying, if you develop these skills, how would or what would it enable you to do? Or, you may, and caveating it, you may never, writing sort of, may never be a novelist, and writing sort of really sort of flowery poetry may not ever be your thing, but actually constructing sort of, standard English does have does have benefits, and then asking them what the benefits are, and asking them to sort of, what I like to do something about where I say, can you identify a time when either you sort of liked reading or stories and writing on even a very basic level, and or a time when you began to feel, I'm not very good at this, or this isn't for me. Do you know what I mean? What's their backstory in terms of English? What's their backstory in terms of maths? Were they humiliated at school? Where they, did, we've all got, I remember when I was at school, in woodwork, a teacher sort of made this bird table, and it was a bit rubbish, but I sort of made it, and for me, I was quite pleased with it, and I took it home to my dad, and I love my dad, but he was quite strict and everything, and he just looked at me and says, "What the hell's that, Bobby?" I still sort of remember that. He wasn't sort of doing it to humiliate me, but he was quite sort of honest, and and it did have gaps. But I mean, that sort of reinforced the mindset that I'm quite smart and I'm good at sport, but I'm not very good with my hands. And I have, even though I teach this stuff, I must be honest, I've still carried a little bit that sense of, and there's some truth in it, but it isn't. I'm not good at DIY. I'm not good with my hands. I'm not a particularly practical person. So they might have had that same message about, right. A teacher might have sort of rolled their eyes or said, "Can't you see how foolish?" Or "It's so easy. You just put a apostrophe is just where a letter's missed out." Or they've said it in a sort of really frustrated way that's embedded that idea of, I'm not very smart. The easiest thing to do is just to not try too hard.
I mean, what I get is the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but it's almost like, oh, I never read. Oh, I never tried. Oh, I never did. And I said, oh, okay. So what's stopping you? My typical question is, what's stopping you from trying now?
Yeah, great question.
If you don't, basically, if you try now, chances are you won't have to try again next year. Otherwise, this is going to keep repeating for another 3 years. And, is this something that you want? Or would you like to get it, bang it in the net, as it were, this year? Get it
Yeah.
out the way and then focus on something that you really enjoy doing. So I suppose that's it's spelling out the benefits, isn't it? And as you said, going through their backstory, where did they start to lose the joy of reading, or the joy of communicating and writing about themselves, or writing about their interests and so on. So just thinking about in FE, well, I do I'll be honest. I don't know how the rest of FE works, but from what I know, is all our learners come in to do a vocational course, and then English and maths is bolted on, as it were. How do you think we could sort of backpack English and maths onto the vocational course so that they can see the relevance of it in their vocational course, is without sort of inventing hair and beauty English and mechanics English and carpentry English, but actually helping them to see the relevance of it in their vocational course.
I think that is one of the sort of the dream tickets, really, when they can apply it to that context. I mean, there's an easy sort of answer to say, but in practice it's hard in reality, because people are busy, and we know, and anyone listening who's in the FE sector will know, we are the Cinderella sector, and we're all stretched. I know school teachers are busy as well and everything, but I mean, the ideal thing is to have regular contact between GCSE teachers and vocational teachers, so both can know what the other's doing. So in the vocational lessons, they can say, I understand with Toby, you're doing ABC this week. And then they can sort of maybe, make reference to that, and make that explicit link between what they're doing in their current course and how writing in a sort of standard way is going to help, and vice versa. We know, we don't have to do it every week because we've got our own syllabus and our own specification to work to, but at least as much as possible, having a sense of what their scheme of work is and trying to sort of make those references. It's easier if you've got a discrete cohort. If your GCSE cohort are all doing motor vehicle maintenance, it's a lot easier. But even if they're not, you can still say, I understand some of you are doing, mechanics at the moment, and what we're doing today has got a relation to that, and then explain why, and get them thinking why. So I think that would be the, good liaison between vocational and GCSE staff, and just very occasionally going into each other's meetings, and even if it's only twice a year. So I'm not unrealistic. I know the pressures of time and everything, but even if very occasionally you showed your face in a couple of the vocational classes, just as a sort of
Yeah.
observer or even a co-teacher, and they did the same. Even once, twice a year, they came in and that could help to make the connections more explicit to students. And ask them. Just say, look, I'm not going to sort of talk at you about how English can help you in
Mm,
different work
mm,
and social contexts. You tell me, you tell me, just, and maybe use some coaching. Say, just imagine you're 10 years time and you got two children and they're coming to you with questions. How helpful would it be to be able to just guide
mm.
them, that sort of thing. Creating that image, there's imaginations and images and that sort of compelling reasons to learn.
I think, I've been reading about drive, and they talk about three things, which is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And I think the first issue is to say, look, you want to master this. Why do you want to master this, and how would it benefit you and your community? And I think that would be a valid starting point. So, and you mentioned marginal gains, okay, which is a it's a good thing to point out that, as I was saying just now, students are using the vocabulary that I teach within the texts that they read. And and I pointed out, when I give them feedback in their writing, I say, oh, you've been using ambitious vocabulary. That's really good. Now we want to look at using language features, which we have been covering before. Let's see if you can put that into place. um, how else can teachers help students see progress apart from loads of marking in notebooks, do you think?
Um, I've got some nice. You'll have your. I've got some nice little simple activities. Not always necessarily to do at the end of a lesson, but sort of review and reflection activities.
Ah.
Um, and like one of the simplest one's called a 1 minute paper, and it takes about a minute, and you can do it on a scrap of paper, or you could do it online. You could do it sort of sticky post-its, but it's basically one thing you're still not sure about, and one thing that you've learned or developed, and one thing that helped you to learn. So even if
Hmm.
they don't answer all three questions every time, we're getting them into the habit of being reflective in terms of, this is what I now know. This is what helped me to know that. Was it practice? Was it trial and error? Was it a particular thing that the teacher said? Was it an activity that just the penny dropped, the insight moment happened? So the what have you learned, the how have you learned it, and the thing you're not sure about. And if we then just take those scraps of paper or online equivalents in, then it's really easy to sort of build the first 10 minutes of the next lesson based on what students have said. So you can have that. It's still there, by the way, Toby.
But yes, still here.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
sorry. My wife's on my wife's phone, and it's gone to a blank screen. But as long as you can hear me,
No, no, no. I can still hear you loud and clear.
so as long
Yeah.
as I can, there's just one more, just in case I forget. Stop Start Continues, fantastic as well as a reflective tool to help them realize what they've mastered, what they're not sure about. And it's a simple coaching model, but it can be used with students. Just what isn't helping me to learn. So it could be a
Mm,
behavior, it could be a thought, it could be a bad habit. That's the stop. The start is what haven't I got around to doing yet, but I could actually do that could help me to either embed something or make progress. And then the continue is, what am I doing now? What's helping me to make the progress? And these sorts of little techniques, they can be seen as gimmicks, but if we really sort of take them seriously and don't just do it in, like, at the end of the lesson when everyone's tired and say, right, before you go,
mm.
and then the students are already wanting out of the room. We
Yeah,
all do
right.
that. We recognize that. But actually make the last 10, 15 minutes of a session time
Mm.
for reflection, so they can become aware of what they're mastering and where the blocks are.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today. and visit hashitlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
And we're back with Bob Craig, who's been giving us advice about how to promote motivational mindset in the classroom. Bob, I was interested. So we've covered mastery to some extent, and when you were talking about the three things that students could be doing, continue doing, and they could improve on. I thought of another question, which is, what have you done today that you feel particularly proud of? I don't know if that's a good question to ask students, but I thought it might be relevant.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's a really good question. And you can almost do that as like a little speed day. If you want to vary it, rather than just ask an individual or a group, you can just sort of just for 3 minutes and just get them standing up and saying, right, you got a minute to tell someone, your partners, just one little thing. Don't have to be anything big, something that you're proud of, and then they move on after 2 or 3 minutes to someone else, and then 2 or 3 minutes. It takes about 8 minutes, but they actually hear other people's thing that they're proud of, and maybe get a tip or some sort of piece of advice from each other. So yeah, I'm a big fan of speed dating.
So back to you then. My issue is that students will talk about anything but what I've asked them to talk about. So if as soon as I turn my back to them, there's the conversations about how'd you get on with your exams just now? What's for dinner? What time does the lesson finish? Do you know? Anything else but actual focusing on task. So what could I do to help students focus on task and actually communicate with each other about the things that will help them to learn?
Whew, I'd be a millionaire, Toby, if I
Yeah,
could
I
give
know,
you
right? Yeah, that's
if I could
why.
give you I give you a great answer to that. Then I seriously, it's a tough. I don't want to sound like an older guy who's been around sort of 30 years in education, but I don't know. I think students do seem to be a bit more distracted, a bit less able or willing to focus and engage. I don't know if
Mm,
it's
mm, mm, mm.
something to do with the sort of the 24/7 dopamine gush that they get from interacting with their handheld devices, or whether it's something else. But I do think it's tough. But basically, it's again, it's another easy answer, but hard. But that sort of variety, sometimes if we're really honest with ourselves, and we almost observe ourselves, we've got a format. In some bits format where you do something start at the beginning, something engaging, and you have the activity and then the reviews and things. But we do tend to stick to the same things. And I've done hundreds of observations in my time, and Kahoot is the quiz of choice, and the students are almost like, oh, that's another Kahoot, and unless
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
used
yeah.
to error check, unless it's used not just as a bit of fun, but as a way to consolidate learning, a way to sort of share mistakes and rectify and get students sort of helping each other out, then they're not going to focus. So I think having the first 10 minutes of a lesson as well, I think are vital, Toby. And sometimes we're doing the register and we're making announcements, and we're sort of, students are walking in late, and we're
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
saying, okay, come on. So I think if we can, I don't know, some places don't allow you to do this. I had a bit of a conversation stroke dispute with someone just recently. I was observed, and I didn't do the register in the first 10 minutes, and I sort of made a case, and I said, I understand there are some reasons for that, but I want students to sort of do something meaningful the minute they walk into class. I want there to be
Yeah.
a video running, or an image, or a question, or something on a table, and I want them to quickly get in, coats off, sit down, rather than sort of anyone seen Sean today? Oh, she's not here, Miss, Bob. She's doing this. Oh, okay. And then and then it's like, right, now we're going to start the lesson. I really think in order to get students focused, it's important. All stages are important, but I think the start is arguably the most important thing.
Mm, mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
get and metacognition and talking about distraction, talking about the perils of multitasking to them, talking about saying, if you're going to, when you get home, if you're going to practice something or you're going to do homework or independent learning, then better to do 20 minutes focus time than an hour's non-focus time. Then have a conversation with them about mute. Don't use the science that we know probably as educators, like dual coding and sort of cognitive load. The idea that
Mm,
the
mm.
brain the brain can't process two types of written information effectively at the same time, so they can't read and listen at the same time.
No, no, no,
So if
you
we
can't.
want So if we want them to focus on something that we've got on the board, for example, then don't be talking too much. Unless the thing on the board is an image, we can talk around images. But if there's a written language and we're speaking, no one can do both. We can't do both.
No.
People can't do both. So being really honest, and that's where things like, I can't emphasize enough the importance of things like little non-threatening, non-sort of written up peer observations. Come into my lesson for 5 minutes, Toby, and I'll go into yours next week just for 5 minutes. And I want you to look at whether the students are focused and how else I could have set up that activity more effectively. So we have these
Mm.
sort of, because we're habitual. All humans are habitual, so we get into habits of delivery that maybe aren't conducive to curiosity and focused attention. We're talking too much and we've got too much going on, and we're shuffling around our handouts as
Yes.
and just we need to sort of practice what we preach, I think, a little bit in terms of things like dual coding, which anyone listening, it's the basic idea that the brain processes images and language perfectly well, but not two types of language. So I've got a little tip. You're the much million times more IT than me, but if I'm showing something on a whiteboard and I want them to listen to me for a minute, we're having a discussion, just press W or B on the key. So B blacks it and W whites it. So you
I did
just
not know that. I did not know that, and it's been bugging me for years. I do something different.
well, whatever works, but you know what I mean. So we can't expect them to focus if we're giving them more than one stimulus, if we're being a bit overly predictable in how we package up the lessons, and if they're easily distracted. So yeah,
Yeah. So that answers my question, really. How do I get them to, no, I don't want to say get them. I think that's the wrong sort of language to use. It's how can I, present things in a way that will allow them to become engaged and focused. And I do, when they come into the lesson, there's something on the board or there's something on the table, ready for them. And it's while they're working that I rush around and do the register. I don't need to call out
yeah,
people's names. I know them already,
yeah.
and I do it that way. So, but really, what I'd like to think about, what sort of teaching habits do you think strengthen a mindset where students can expect to get better with practice? So, how do they develop concentration? It's always a smart target, isn't it? I'm going to be more focused in class. Well, how do you develop that?
I think there's some nice little language techniques. So I don't know if you're familiar with NLP, neuro linguistic programming,
Yeah,
and some of
yeah,
it, it's I think a bit cuckoo land, but some of it is good. And they've got a number of models there where almost like embedded commands. So I think we have got to be clear of when we're just having a casual conversation and it's informal. I like to have a laugh with students. I like a bit of banter, but when I mean it, I say, right, look at me, and I'm sort of I put my serious head on, And then I try to do a bit almost like mild hypnosis. I say, look, as you begin to focus on this, don't be surprised if at first you struggle, but then it becomes clearer. And there's sort of two commands in there. You're saying as you focus your attention, rather than okay, guys, now be quiet. Now you need to focus. So I sort of put my serious head on and say, right, just I want 2 minutes of your attention. Then I'll put it back to you, and I'm going to set you a task, and you can work together on your own. But for now, just look this way. And then I sort of speak in a more meaningful way. I slow down, and I say things like, at first you might not quite grasp this concept, but with focused attention, as you begin to practice, you will, and that's what you do in sort of yoga classes and mindful classes, where you say, okay, now just begin to focus on your breathing. You're not telling them to focus on your breathing, but it's the same principle of just slow down. And as you begin to do X, Y, Z, as you begin to focus, as you practice on this topic area, you may find that things that previously you found difficult, you begin to sort of grasp. And it sounds a bit on its own, that isn't going to sort of transform students, but just us being skillful in knowing when we mean it, and students knowing when we mean to cut out the chatter, I think is invaluable. And speaking of focus, I forgot the actual question. Sorry, I'm waffling a bit.
No. We were. It was literally that. How do we, students know that they should be concentrating more, but it's how do we enable them, to practice this skill?
You know the deliberate practice concept, Toby?
No, please.
So there's a common phrase, isn't there, that we've all heard: practice makes perfect, and we all know that. But it doesn't really. You can embed bad habits through practice, and that's one of the problems, I think, with some of our. If we're focusing mainly on the GCSE sort of recent thing today, you embed bad practice. Doesn't make perfect.
No.
Deliberate practice does. So focusing on one small thing with almost like a laser pinpoint zoom in focus with a goal in mind is where progress begins to sort of happen. So not being too ambitious and talking and having these conversations with students. Ask them what learning looks like. Ask them about practice. When have you got better at something? And then hopefully someone will say, you just got to practice. And you'll say, practice is at the heart of it, but it's more than that. What happens if you keep making mistakes? And then hopefully some of them will say, well, you self-correct. And then some of them might say, well, I go and talk to my big sister because she's at a different level to me in Minecraft. So you have, I think the biggest point, I think, today that I'm picking up from things that I'm saying is the idea of having conversations with students about learning, about practice, about focused attention. I've got a great little exercise. I think I've probably done it with you in your class when we worked together, Toby, where you get, say, right, just on a piece of paper, draw 2 horizontal lines. And when I tell you to start on the top line, and then just get them to write a simple sentence like, I am a great multitasker. It almost doesn't matter what the question is. And then the bottom line, right, digits 1 to 20. And pretty much all of them will get it right, or most of it right. And then say, right, this time you're going to do the same numbers and the same sentence, but you're going to switch from letters to numbers. So you're going to have one letter and you're going down to a number and one letter. And it's just every time I've done it with experienced and, very intelligent teachers and senior leaders, there's always people who make mistakes. There's always people who give up on that simple task. And by doing that, it makes the point that 2 simple things on their own become complex when we're trying to do more than one thing. When we're multitasking, when we're switching from one thing to the other, it's energy sapping. We have to switch on every time. You know that 6 comes after 5, but when you're sort of going from letter to number, you have to think 6 rather than just do it automatically. You don't even think about when you write 1 to 20. So just keep having these. And I know that the pressure's always time, and I've got 34 weeks or whatever and 2 hours a week. I haven't got time to do all this. But I would argue that just dripping in every sort of third or fourth week, a 15, 20-minute conversation about learning, about deliberate practice, about focus can really sort of could be the thing that switches students to say, you know what, I have got it within my gift to make some progress if I turn off my music, if I'm not doing three things at once whilst I'm trying to write my couple of paragraphs. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing I mentioned earlier. I say to students, no, I'm not expecting you to go home and spend 3 hours a night revising, but if once or twice a week you spend 20 minutes to half an hour practicing an element of English writing, but you do it without distraction and you do it in a deliberate way and you do it with some sort of, after you've done it, some sort of reflection, and just might be just 2 simple bullet points, or sound record yourself on what you learn, then, you know, half the students still won't do it and won't learn anything, but you begin to break through to some of the students who want to learn but haven't really had the strategies before because they've been written off as not very good at English. You're talking to them like grown-up adults about principles and, you know, concepts of learning that could make the difference with at least some of your students, definitely.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Teachers could work a flexible 4-day teaching week under new proposals from the Scottish Government, according to a report on the BBC News website. Plans also include reduced classroom contact time with pupils and agreed national minimal standards for pupil learning hours. It would leave a 5th day for professional learning activities outside of the classroom, including lesson preparation, marking and training. Scotland's Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said it demonstrated a clear commitment to teachers. As previously reported on Teachers Talk Radio News, the EIS and NASUWT unions are currently balloting members on strike action over a failure to reduce class contact time by 90 minutes a week, as promised by the SNP. This new proposal could enable later start times, extended breaks, or restructured school days. The teaching unions emphasise that any allocated outside of the classroom time should be used as teachers see fit. Full details and analysis can be found online. In Northern Ireland, the UK Supreme Court has ruled in favour of a family who took legal action over the teaching of RE. The legal action focused on the rights of parents to ensure religious education is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. In the state-controlled primary the child attended, pupils received non-denominational Christian religious education and took part in Christian worship. The parents, however, did not wish the child to be taught that Christianity was an absolute truth. The RE syllabus in Northern Ireland was drafted by the 4 main Christian churches and applies to both primary and post-primary schools. The ruling does not mean that the teaching of RE in schools will end, or that there will be no more hymns and prayers in assemblies, but change will be needed. In the ruling, the judges said there was a complete absence of plurality in relation to the teachings or practices of any other religions or non-religious traditions and philosophies. but they also made it clear that no one is suggesting that religious education should not be provided in schools in Northern Ireland. More details and reaction can be found online. Schools Week reports that 1/3 of pupils' GCSE entries don't fit the reformed Progress 8 measure. According to the article, proposed changes to league tables will make little difference to the Progress 8 and Attainment 8 scores of most schools, but will likely affect GCSE entries, with just 65% of current students filling all slots on the reformed measures. FFT Data Lab has analysed the impact proposed changes will have based on entries and outcomes for pupils who sat GCSEs last year. Under the new proposals, English and Maths will remain in the first two buckets, but two buckets will be created specifically for science qualifications, including double science, separate sciences and computing. The remaining four would be the new breadth buckets, and these would have to include a subject from two of the three categories of humanities, creative subjects and languages. Data Lab's analysis found that applying the new rules to last year's results showed that 92% of schools ended up with a revised score within 0.1 points of their existing score. 6% of schools would have a P8 score between 0.1 and 0.2 points below their previous score, and just 1% would have a score over 0.2 points below. The effect on Attainment 8 was also minimal, and there's more details of this analysis online. However, the article goes on to say that changes are likely to have more of an impact on the qualifications for which pupils are entered. Data Lab found that just 65% of pupils in 2024 entered qualifications that would have filled all 10 slots of the new league table measures. This was largely due to having insufficient entries to fill Group 4, the slots reserved for two subjects from humanities, creative and languages. And this was particularly the case for disadvantaged pupils, where only 54% filled all 10 slots. Overall, 33% of pupils do not fill their Group 4 slots. 6% of pupils had no entries in any of the three categories of subject. More details and comment from a range of head teachers can be found online. Finally, secondary school teachers in Greece are set to go through an intensive course in using AI tools, as the country assumes a frontline role in incorporating AI into its education system. The Guardian reports that staff in 20 schools will be trained in a specialised version of ChatGPT, custom made for the academic institutions. The initiative will be expanded in January and makes Greece one of the first countries to pioneer the use of generative AI in the classroom. In schools where the majority of pupils already use apps like ChatGPT, the government has been guided by the belief that if you can't beat the bot, befriend the bot. Not everyone has been enthusiastic, with both students and teachers expressing concern that it could lead to teacherless classes, exacerbate screen addiction, and further restrict investment in the country's education, which only has 5% of the country's budget allocated to it. More details can be found on the Guardian website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
And we're back again. So I've been talking to Bob Craig about motivating students in the classroom, defining purpose, how to encourage concentration. And I was always thinking, Bob, what I'm interested in really is there's a particular kind of flow that students can get into where they find the work that they're doing totally mesmerizing, as you were, engaging, as people call it. Mm-hmm. And, I was just wondering, do you have any sort of tips on how teachers can achieve that flow moment in the classroom?
I think it's similar to the previous conversation, partly on focused attention.
Focused attention.
Avoiding distractions, having conversations with students about the value of doing that, the value of perseverance and having these sort of conversations. But basically, time goes quickly when the thing and you get into a state of flow when whatever you're doing is inherently interesting. And I think we've talked before, off not on this channel, obviously, but we've talked about my passion is curiosity. I think if
Yes.
I had to identify one thing and says, what is the one thing that can really sort of the engine of learning, the thing that can spark students' motivation and interest, and it's curiosity. And that's what gets people in the flow, because when you're curious, you want to discover, and there's a sense of wonder, and there's a sense of almost adventure, if that's not gone too far with English writing. But so if we, and there's lots of research that shows the sort of brain science involved in when we're focusing, the sort of the dopamine is firing because what we're looking at and what our attention is focused on is useful, but also just inherently interesting. And then that sort of gets the dopamine going, and we're more likely to remember things later when, at the time of learning, our curiosity and we were in a state of flow, basically. So if we sort of agree that there's something in that, then the next question is, how do we use curiosity as a driver for learning? And it touches on some of the things we talked about, the sort of use of image stimulus, the use of short videos with, tasks associated, drawing on students' own interests, get them writing about things. I mean, when I was teaching GCSE English, which is it's a bit of a while ago now, but my sort of, and not everyone agrees with what I'm going to say, but my take on it was forget about exam practice and exams until sort of January, February, and just get them enjoying writing, get them sort of writing and hopefully then enjoying things. So writing about things that interest them, sort of reviews of a band that they've seen or a game that they've played, or and then, through doing that, that's how we correct their grammar, spelling, punctuation. That's where we sort of look at it and say, I'll come back to you in 5 minutes, try and have one more point in relation to what you said there. Try and use a couple of adjectives to describe that experience or that. And we sort of just get them right, get Blake in that mindset that we've touched on of this is boring, hard, or not particularly relevant to me. Whereas some curriculum, I don't know what you do, Toby. I know I've talked probably a bit too much, so I'll come back to you in a second. But but I don't know whether you do that. But I know some colleges are sort of straight into past papers pretty much from week 2, 3, 4. And it's like, oh God, we've done this before. Flipping heck, I was rubbish then, and yeah, and
Exactly.
so get them writing almost anything, get them reading almost anything, get them saying, the standard thing in English, isn't it? Whether it's degree level through to A level for GCSE is form and content and things like audience and purpose. So if we can get students to recognise that all texts have a form, which can be, a leaflet, journal article, blog, letter, and have a content, which is what they're saying. And what we try to do is marry those two things together, and then also talk about audience and purpose. So just keep going on, but doing it in an interesting way by, who is this advert aimed at, or who is this? I think the danger of once you get over 30 almost of trying to be cool and using that. But however, having said that, I think that's the right thing to do. So ask them what they're interested in. Ask them to find reviews and things. But if they don't, just we get them and say, so what language is this sort of advert or article using? What odd words are being used? And is it using standard English, or is it? And just really keep starting from them. And then we can begin to sort of, once we've got them in their interest and their trust, then we can start and their flow when they're actually doing something that maybe they'll be able to use later. They are writing a letter to a friend they haven't seen for 2 years or something, or they are sort of doing something meaningful. Then we can do the more boring, inverted commas, hard stuff from January, February, March onwards, where we start saying, right, in the exam, there's certain things that you'll be expected, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but we're going to really focus on these 4 or 5 things. If you master these 4 or 5 things, then you've got a good chance of getting to the grade level that you want. So you
Yeah.
talk about intrinsic, the extrinsic motivation. You want to get a good grade. I want to help you get a good grade. This is how you do it. But we do that once we've already got their interest and trust in week sort of 12, 13, 14, rather than week 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly. Well, I cheat because what I do is I teach the skills that they need alongside, texts which I hope are interesting. Texts which I hope are interesting, not necessarily what meets their particular interests, but it's just like texts that they don't quite expect. If you know, if you see what I mean. So I'll use that as a sort of carriage, if you like. So then I
Mm-hmm.
say, look, so for example, we did a text on which related to Black Lives Matter,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, well, what do you expect to happen at the end? Oh, well, so and so is going to get shot. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's see how, the writer builds up the tension to that point.
Yeah,
You know,
excellent.
and students immediately started reading. Once we started reading, they were like, oh, she's thinking back to from when she was 12, and someone piped
Brilliant.
up, hey, that's a flashback, and I was like, oh, I don't have to teach this.
Yeah.
You actually have identified it yourself and you're learning yourself. This makes life a lot easier. But it's producing the environment where, as you said, students trust me to lead the session, you know.
And it sounds like you have got that. That was interesting what you described there, Toby. That anticipation, and I mentioned curiosity earlier, and that a lot of the research into curiosity suggests that probably the biggest aspect is filling information gaps. The thing
Yeah.
that makes us curious is that we've got some level of knowledge or insight into something, and then we want to sort of so we're not starting from a blank slate, and then we want to sort of anticipating what happened at the end of the text or at the end of the extract is exactly where curiosity is founded. I want to find out. I'm compelled and curious to find out what happened at the end. So if we can create learning environments where we foreground curiosity and that sense of what if, what next, and students are guessing sometimes and not always doing it from a sort of, using the English terms we want them to learn, just doing it from use your own language sometimes, just to begin to say, you know what, it's pretty cool coming to these lessons. And I can see that in pretty much every situation, there's people involved and there's an ending and there's a beginning and and you begin to get them to realize written texts are pretty much the same as films and everyday
Mm,
life
mm,
where
mm, mm.
there's a stimulus and there's an outcome and there's a problem and there's a resolution. Even if we don't use the word resolution thing, but there's a sort of something happens and then we get beyond that either in a good way or it snowballs. Really get, and that's what all narratives are about, isn't it? That there's a
Yes.
development of
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. And it's like I said, the magic happens when the students are the ones who identify this and tell me about it rather than me, because it's weird. As soon as I start talking, you can see their eyes glaze over, but
Not quite.
once it really is, it's like once I start
Yeah.
explaining, it's like, oh, okay, he's explaining now, it's time to switch off.
Mm.
Whereas if I can almost motivate students to give their own, answers and to give their own ideas about it, that's when the magic happens.
I
Wow.
get it, Toby. Just one last little point, and a little bit of rote learning doesn't go amiss. So if you've got 10 key terms that you want your students to know rather than 50, and you got it on a poster and they're using their own language, you can say, so what does this relate to in our sort of 10 golden rules or our 10 key points? So that sort of rote embedding, whatever the core messages are, I think can be invaluable.
Bob, this has been a very, very productive conversation. I've got one last question, if I may. What
Hmm.
changes could a teacher make tomorrow that would instantly boost motivation in the classroom, do you think?
Oh,
I mean, we've
um,
got interest, we've got curiosity, we've got the deliberate practice.
we've got
Um,
map purpose as well. You, the Dan Pink's idea in Drive is about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Students have to have a clear sense of why this is useful, and we can do that from what the initial point of that I started with, of saying, instead of saying this will help you with, saying how will this help you. So maybe I think actually there's lots of things, but maybe encouraging colleagues to dip into each other's, to learn from each other a bit more than we tend to do.
there you
You know,
go.
finish your class 5 minutes early once every half term, and step into someone else's and see how they end their classes, and then have a professional conversation with them. So I think that's maybe, off the top of my head, one thing that we could do better as a profession that could make a difference.
And I like that. Finishing a lesson 5 minutes early is always my favorite technique. Well, but it's got a purpose behind it. I'm going to see what next door is doing.
Yeah,
Bob, thank you so much for tonight. I've learned a lot, and I'm certain that the audience has as well. And I hope to see you soon.
thanks,
Thank you.
Toby. Take care.
All right. Take
Cheers,
care.
mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.